Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Putting on Bitcoin on the Balance Sheet panel here today. I'm Helm, Head of Product for Bitcoin for Corporations at Bitcoin Magazine. Today we're going to be discussing why Bitcoin has become a critical asset for corporate balance sheets and how it's transforming the way corporations plan long-term financial strategies. With the UAE well established as a global financial hub, understanding Bitcoin's role in corporate treasury strategies is crucial for the region to continue securing and maintaining its financial future for decades to come. I'm joined by three leaders pioneering the charge in corporate Bitcoin adoption. Gentlemen, please briefly introduce yourselves and your company's Bitcoin position. Sid, let's start with you.
Check. Hi. Siddarth Bharwani. I am Joint Managing Director and CEO of Jetking Infotrain Limited, 40-year-old organization. We adopted Bitcoin strategy in 2022, and the idea is to be the first and only company in India to adopt Treasury in Bitcoin in India.
Hello everyone, Alexandre Laizet, Deputy CEO and Director of Bitcoin Strategy at the Blockchain Group. It's the first Bitcoin treasury company listed in France, and we are specialized in data intelligence, AI, and decentralized tech development. We have launched our Bitcoin treasury company strategy on 5 November, and so far it's been very good.
My name is Patrick Lowry. I'm the CEO of Samara Asset Group. We are a publicly traded company based out of Malta, albeit listed in Germany. We've had Bitcoin on our balance sheet since our founding in January 2018, but just over this past summer, we took a little bit of a page out of Michael Saylor's playbook and issued to at least what, in my mind, is the first time somebody issued a bond backed and collateralized by Bitcoin. So we were very happy with the successful placement of this bond just over this past summer.
Three experts here on stage, folks. Okay, so before we jump into the conversation today, just quick show of hands from the audience. How many of you are hearing about Bitcoin for corporate treasuries for the first time? Nobody? Everyone's here an expert, I take it? Okay, show of hands real quickly. How many of you have already been familiar with like MicroStrategy and what they're doing? Yes, everybody? Michael Saylor fans? Great. Awesome. So, all right, I want to establish a baseline here with the topic, why Bitcoin for corporate treasuries? Patrick, let's start with you. Why are companies increasingly looking to Bitcoin as a reserve asset, and how does it compare to traditional options like cash or gold?
Because the dollar and fiat currencies are going to zero. And I don't think it's a joke or anything even remotely extreme to say nowadays. If you look at the history of the dollar, ever since the 1930s when the Federal Reserve came into existence, the dollar has effectively lost already 95% of its purchasing value, right? And okay, you could say that's about 100 years or so. That's not the worst thing in the world. But the thing is, we as human beings almost live 100 years anyway. And inflation is only getting worse. We've learned this during the COVID crisis, where we started to see double-digit inflation in Western economies, which hadn't existed since the 80s or even years before. Now that we have this narrative that the dollar is going to zero, that fiat currencies are becoming worth less every single year, corporates are justified in looking at alternatives. Well, what is the best alternative out there? See, for us, it's Bitcoin. And granted, Bitcoin has been core to Samara's business for the 7-8 years that it has existed. But other people are now finally starting to realize this and catch on. Bitcoin is not just a digital store of value. It is the most perfect money that humanity has ever conceived of. And if you want to be holding assets and protecting your shareholders, you need to have Bitcoin on your balance sheet. I believe if you're the CEO of a publicly traded company and you don't have a Bitcoin strategic reserve by 2030, your shareholders will vote you out of your position. You will no longer have a job if you do not embrace Bitcoin.
Alexandre, perhaps building off some of the points Patrick just brought up, you've been very vocal about corporate Bitcoin adoption as a whole. Can you explain how companies adopting Bitcoin are reshaping corporate finance and what opportunities this strategy brings to others looking to follow suit?
Yeah, so the first two questions I always get is why Bitcoin and not other crypto assets? And the second one is, am I too late, actually? So the first one, I got it this morning, actually, and the answer is quite simple. It's the only asset that has absolute scarcity that is guaranteed by the most decentralized and secure network. So there is no comparison on Earth. This is the best store of value. not only the best digital store of value, it's the best store of value. Then on the next question, are we too late? No. Before joining the blockchain group as deputy CEO, I was digital assets lead at Accenture, working with more than 30 plus financial institutions and corporations over the world. And now we have 85% of systemic banks in Europe and the US and Canada that have opened access to Bitcoin for their retail and institutional clients. Yet, on the corporate side, we are extremely early. Only 5% of corporate treasurers for big listed companies are considering Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset. You have seen recently Microsoft and now Amazon potentially considering it, but still they make a big mistake potentially, hopefully not for them, but they could, is to consider Bitcoin as an insurance policy. It is not an insurance policy. Imagine you would have a US dollar and Zimbabwe currency. Would you put 95% of your capital in Zimbabwe currency and put 5% in dollars as an insurance policy? No. You would put as much as possible in the US dollar. Well, today you have Bitcoin that generates 60% of annualized return on a four-year calculation. And you have money market funds for corporate treasurers that generate maximum 4 or 5%. Well, where will you put your money? Where will you put your long-term capital? Well, you put it in Bitcoin. And this is what is happening, and the difference will be between listed companies that realize that now, and listed companies that realize that in the next cycle. And the difference will be calculated in billions of dollars. So better realize it now.
Question to you both. What other macro trends do you see kind of evolving with just the recent attention that MicroStrategy has brought to this strategy as a whole?
You mean from a traditional market perspective or macro related to Bitcoin?
Macro related to Bitcoin.
I mean, obviously, you're not just seeing corporates adopt Bitcoin as the primary treasury reserve assets. For instance, like what our companies are doing, and obviously what Michael Saylor has made the playbook for. You're seeing governments around the world starting to have that conversation that they would like to have Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset, similar to how most governments have gold or oil as commodities, and these are all part of strategic reserves. Donald Trump, one of the primary reasons that I believe he got elected is because he wants to have a Bitcoin treasury reserve strategy, and that was a huge signal to the Bitcoin community that, hey, maybe the United States isn't going to be so hostile towards the Bitcoin and even the crypto industry as a whole, but rather it's going to start embracing this and really lead us forward into the next evolution of what the Bitcoin markets will be.
What was your question again? I couldn't hear.
Yeah, from a Bitcoin macro perspective, what other trends are influencing this influx of adoption at a corporate level?
Okay. So in terms of macro view, if we take a step back, we have 900 trillion of assets. Let me simplify it to 1 quadrillion. We are today for Bitcoin at 0.2% of global capital, and we are going to 1% of global capital, 10% of global capital. A potential estimate is the market cap of gold, potentially, as Bitcoin is mostly compared today as gold. And this will, of course, potentially 10x the current market capitalization of Bitcoin. And then after that, of course, part of the bond market, part of the real estate market, some of this capital will flow into Bitcoin. And a key point I want to make is that it's not because capital is flowing to Bitcoin that is bad for other assets. It's just that Bitcoin is, as Dylan Leclerc said before, Bitcoin is Bitcoinizing other type of asset class. The bond market is using Bitcoin for more performing bonds. The real estate market soon, for lending money to buy real estate, lenders will potentially want to have a portion of the deposit to be in Bitcoin as well and share the profits. So basically, even for the USD or the Euro, for example, or here in the UAE, Bitcoin is not bad for the existing local currency. The more Bitcoin a country has, the more Bitcoin private companies have in the country, the stronger the currency, the local currency will get. So I see a world in which you have this Bitcoin digital capital, you have securities that are issued on top of Bitcoin and transacted between Bitcoin and the tokenized security. This is already the case with MicroStrategy, for example. With Stoker in Luxembourg, they tokenize MicroStrategy shares, and you can trade MicroStrategy shares with Bitcoin directly. And at some point, the world will be repriced in Bitcoin. We already do it, but financial institutions, maybe not this cycle, but after the end of the next one, will start to reprice things in Bitcoin. And today, for corporations, and at the blockchain group, we have a Bitcoin standard. We are fully focused on Bitcoin, and we believe that even between Bitcoin treasury companies, the one that will distinguish themselves are the ones that are 121% focused on Bitcoin per share increase over time.
Sid, Jetking has a very unique perspective here, having been a company that's been established for a couple of decades now. Originally in manufacturing and then transferring over into the education space. You guys recently have been acquiring Bitcoin in the last couple of years. How did Jetking get to this point where it was the next evolution in company strategy as a whole?
Sure. So having spent more than 4 decades in the industry, what we realized was the only hedge against for an INR is not even the dollar. It is a supreme currency, which is, of course, Bitcoin. In India, it's moving from a low trust asset class. It's going to a high trust asset class. And what happens is when the adoption takes place, like equity market in India is less than 10% of the population. And we're looking to see if we can skip that generation altogether and see if people can come directly into Bitcoin. And the way they get into a trust market in Bitcoin is if an established player like us possibly takes a position on Bitcoin on our balance sheet, and we end up issuing equity and productize our equity, we are able to scale investments in Bitcoin.
Education is clearly a really important part when adopting this sort of strategy. It's often cited as a barrier to Bitcoin adoption. You know, how can education help companies and teams understand Bitcoin's value proposition, especially in regions like MENA and even India?
So again, India is a high trust market, and it needs a lot of touch and feel to understand something. So looking at us being in education for all these years, what we intend to do is create like center of excellence across rural areas in India, which is very close to villages, maybe give them an exposure of mining, right? And once they understand this exposure, they understand what Bitcoin actually does. So that is a kind of hands and feet experience that we want to give our audience. And the second thing is having corporate finance class workshops, which similar to what we've done with Bitcoin for corporations, to make sure that they get involved at a more macro level with the corporates to make sure that they are getting engaged in Bitcoin.
Alexandre, from your perspective, what misconceptions do companies often have when first considering Bitcoin for their treasury strategies?
Yeah, so one of the misconceptions is that we don't have an operating activity. We do. We have 100, 200 people working in data intelligence and artificial intelligence. We have a part of the team that is also dedicated to decentralized tech development. And over time, of course, most of this might come to more Bitcoin activities. But basically, there is a good advantage as a Bitcoin treasury company to also have an operational activity and to have a primary operational activity that can over time generate excess cash even for the Bitcoin treasury company strategy. So this is one of the misconceptions. Another one, of course, that many of you already know, but that I will repeat, is the volatility. Of course, investors told us, but what are you doing? This will increase the volatility of your stock. Yes, of course. And that is, of course, the objective.
That's the point.
That's the point. Volatility is vitality, as you know, and this allows you to tap into more capital markets and increase your Bitcoin treasury company strategy and this kind of topics. And third point, I think that people misunderstand is they tell me, well, when another company in France is launching a Bitcoin treasury strategy, what happens to yours? well, I'm sorry, but they will be also accumulating Bitcoin, and we are accumulating Bitcoin. So actually, that's one of the first times that we see a virtuous cycle. And that's why actually, and shout out to Bitcoin Magazine and Bitcoin for Corporations, because education, of course, at the end, everything comes down to education. I met actually at a MicroStrategy event, Bitcoin for Corporations, Preston Pish, who told me at the end of the day, it's all about education. And at the time, I didn't really understand it. And now I fully get it 4 years after. Because when people start to understand at the government level, at the state policy level, at corporations level, what is it about Bitcoin, then they make the right decisions because it's surrounded by a set of values that are very good for society overall. And a last piece, I would say, in terms of perspective for the future, what you might expect in the next, maybe this cycle, maybe in the next one, potentially a lot of M&A activity. Because then when Bitcoin companies start to get very important and significant, when you see MicroStrategy that can become a $1 trillion company, a multi-trillion dollar company, you could expect some potentially growth areas that we have not seen yet at this stage. And that might include the acquisition of other corporations, for example.
I think one of the most important things from an education standpoint we have to get over, and we have to stop using this narrative, is that Bitcoin is this pure digital gold. It is the store of value. Now, I do understand the reason why we've used that moniker over the last couple of years, because that's the most easily understood by a layperson or by an institution, because one of the facets of Bitcoin is it is digital gold. It is digitally scarce. It is arguably the most scarce asset on Earth. That resonates, and it's simple. But what we really need to start doing is educating people that Bitcoin isn't just an investment. It's not just digital gold. It's actual money. And what do you do with that money? Well, so from my perspective as Samara Asset Group, one of our core businesses is not just accumulating Bitcoin, but it's investing in funds. We are invested in a lot of liquid hedge funds off of our balance sheet that we only deploy to if they can prove themselves that they have a track record and a strategy that they can beat Bitcoin. And there's a lot of managers that are out there that are very talented that do have these types of strategies. So the question then is, well, why do you have all the money in Bitcoin when you should be allocating to these types of strategies? Well, the rationale is that over time, as these funds continue to call capital, the value of our treasury, the value of our reserve, which again is in Bitcoin, continues to appreciate in value relative to the dollar, relative to the euro, and we deploy whenever we find the managers that have a strategy that fits to our overall goals as Samara Asset Group. When you start thinking about this in terms of a corporate strategy, for a more traditional business, we are, as Samara, an investment business at the end of the day. But from a more corporate finance perspective, when you can start looking at Bitcoin as your corporate reserve, that now it's not just trying to find a corporate rate of return that you can deliver to shareholders, but now you have to beat Bitcoin's corporate rate of return. And if you don't, you should just be holding Bitcoin as your core business. This is really a dynamic change. Because if you're a traditional company, regardless of where you are in the world, every academic will always say the hurdle rate is between 7 to 8%, something along those lines. Okay, Bitcoin's earning something like 48%, 49% year over year. You should only be investing your reserve in growing your business if you're going to beat that 50% hurdle year in and year out. And when you start teaching Bitcoin as money, that is earning yield for you on your balance sheet, and you should only be liquidating it to have businesses that are exceeding Bitcoin's own hurdle rate, I think that's where you're going to start to have a different conversation and really educate people from a corporate perspective what Bitcoin truly is for their balance sheet.
So we're very lucky in the United States and the European Union to have, friendly legislation towards Bitcoin. But I know, Sid, you and I have chatted privately that...
U.S. is arguable on that one.
Fair enough. I think Sid would argue that from India's perspective. So my question to you is, with MicroStrategy's example and now Jetking's in India, how do you see their leadership, your leadership, kind of bridging the gap for companies that are new to Bitcoin in your region?
So again, I think it boils down to massive amount of information sharing with the regulators, right? And the compliance, the people in charge for compliance. At this stage, when we went out to the top 4 consulting firms, all of them rejected, saying that we will not take the project. When we spoke to some audit firms, they said they might not take any audit work from us. The point is that people are still scared at this stage, and the only way to get over that that fear from the compliance is to largely make sure that the information sharing stage is as transparent as possible. And in that transparency, it's not just a one-off approach. It is something that has to be done consistently. India has one of the finest UPI systems, which is a digital payment system. And the only reason it was successful was a corporate charter that drive the communication forward. So I think a similar charter from us, from some of the other industry leaders driving this initiative forward, is something that makes the transparency real.
All right, gentlemen, I know we're coming up 5 minutes here, so final thoughts. Where do you see corporate Bitcoin adoption heading in the next 1 to 2 years, and what role will the U.S. and MENA play in this narrative? Sid, let's start with you, and then we can come down this way.
Yeah, so what we can see is, I would say that Bitcoin will become the benchmark for corporate finance. If you underperform Bitcoin with your long-term capital, what are you doing? That will be the key question of shareholders. You are wasting shareholder value by not allocating long-term capital to Bitcoin. And what I would say as well is that there is value in focusing the treasury strategy on Bitcoin. If you take, for example, a 5-year period, Bitcoin has done 10, 15x. You see that MicroStrategy has done 30x in this period because basically they are at a 2x Bitcoin leverage, let's say, without liquidation risk that we know. And then when you take Tesla, for example, that bought Bitcoin but sold Bitcoin, and we don't really know what their strategy is, and the focus of the treasury is not the accumulation long-term of Bitcoin, they have just done 16x, sorry. So Bitcoin 15x, Tesla 16x, MicroStrategy with focus 30x. And I think that there is a huge value in Bitcoin treasury companies to focus on Bitcoin increase per share over time. And there is also a value in the early stage. That's where we are at the blockchain group. And since the launch of our strategy on November 5, Bitcoin has done 50% increase, MicroStrategy 70, 80% increase, Metaplanet 60% increase, and us 120% increase. So, of course, this is the early stage. There lies also the opportunity, and we hope to have a faith similar to one of Metaplanet that has done a huge growth in the last year, and MicroStrategy as well.
So I think a 1 or 2 year horizon is pretty short for Bitcoin, right? I think it's one of those assets which is to infinity. I think it will replace gold, like Sailor says. And for India to plan something like this, I personally feel that there needs to be a lot more community-driven conversations internally. There is not enough people coming out, fund houses not coming out and speaking, taking a call, taking a position. And there are maybe a smaller size companies who are taking the initiative right now. So I personally feel a community-driven approach towards what Bitcoin can do and the potential Bitcoin has for an emerging market like India is what the narrative should be.
So I think exactly like Sid said, it's very hard to map Bitcoin over a short time horizon because typically we have these 4-year cycles that we're constantly going through in the Bitcoin industry, right? And a lot of this is tied to the halving, some of it's tied to scams and a lot of other nonsense from bad players that have happened in the industry. But we've always had these bull cycles followed by very bearish cycles, these crypto winters we so call them. I think we are going to start to see the death of the crypto winter. We are starting to see hyper-Bitcoinization, right? We always had the moniker, first they mock you, then they fight you, then you win. We've now won. And I think we're at a point where now governments around the world, corporations around the world, are now starting to recognize that this Bitcoin thing truly is not going away. There's only one thing you can do from a game theory perspective with regards to Bitcoin, is you have to embrace it. And I already said this when we started this conversation. I believe if you are the CEO or a board member of a public company and you do not adopt a Bitcoin standard over the course of this next cycle, you will be out of a job. And I don't say that facetiously in any stretch of the imagination. You either have to choose Bitcoin or you're going to die.
Everybody gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve, right?
You can't think about it like that. Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. Doesn't matter what the price is. You just got to stack it, accumulate it, and put it to work for you.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate the time today. I encourage anybody in the audience who is on a corporate treasury board or is looking to adopt Bitcoin as a treasury strategy to talk to any of these three individuals here. I mean, we have India, France, and Germany represented, and we also have Dylan LeClaire and Metaplanet over at Japan as well. So if you see them around, say hello. Gentlemen, thanks very much.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Is your company ready for the next evolution in financial strategy? Bitcoin for Corporations is your partner in securing the future of your business. With exclusive membership benefits, our comprehensive masterclass, and a network of trusted service providers, we provide the insights and resources to help you incorporate Bitcoin into your financial strategy, ensuring stability and long-term value. Strengthen your business. Innovate with confidence. Bitcoin for Corporations, protecting your treasury and positioning you for the future.